right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Supply Chain Strategies for 2032 webinar. And today, really excited to have with us Harry Moser from the Reshoring Initiative. And really great to connect with you, Harry. And so to kind of get started, for those that are listening or watching, my name is Jon Washington. I'm founder of the Innovation Garage. And we do these sessions every quarter. And it's really great to connect with everyone. And what we're really excited about is we've got celebrating 10 years in business and doing work with about 40 organizations around the world. We've trained about 1,000 through that time. And what we wanted to do with a session like today is really reach out to some thought leaders and some folks that have really made a positive impact in the work that we've done and been a helpful influence as we've got started. And so with that, I'm pleased to present Harry Moser, founder of the Reshoring Initiative, with us. And so, Harry, if you could take a moment, talk about your organization and yourself, I'd really be appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's great to be here and great to meet everybody out there in the audience. My background: I'm an MIT engineer, University of Chicago MBA. Have worked in manufacturing for 55 years, so a long time, and ran a $100 million a year company selling CNC machine tools all over North America and manufacturing them. So a very enjoyable manufacturing career. I love manufacturing. Retired from that in 2010, founded the nonprofit Reshoring Initiative. Our mission is to bring back or bring enough jobs to balance the trade deficit to make imports equal exports, and that would require about 5 million more manufacturing jobs, about a 40% increase in manufacturing.
Excellent. And I love to talk about connections and how we bumped into each other. And so, my first recollection of bumping into you was actually in Washington, D.C. And so this goes back 2013 or so, at the first Select USA Investment Summit, I think. So that goes quite a ways back. And you were gracious enough to have another, conversation with me and follow up just as we were getting started in, consulting and delivering value to others. And so that's how we've connected. But I think, between us, there's this common passion, if you will, about making sure that organizations and their supply chains run really effectively and they deliver value to their end customers, and they do that as lean, as effectively as possible. And so, again, really grateful for you making time to kind of have the conversation and share some of the insights with the folks that are listening or watching. So great. So kind of during the program, for those that are listening, we're going to cover a couple of things. We're going to cover, comprehensive big picture and multi-year horizon perspective. Talk about scenario planning and supply chain, because, localizing is going to be a heavy lift for some organizations. And again, there's reasons that is. A lot of these things that we're facing today are based on decisions that were made many, many years ago. And we want to talk about lean thinking mindset as part of the conversation. Talk about how maybe what we thought was lean maybe isn't today, or, what manifested out of that really isn't as lean as what we thought it was. And the other thing, Harry, I think is great as well is, help those that are listening and watching, how can they convince customers to reshore and buy from them? And so these are all the factors that we're going to talk about today. And so what we did in the pre-work for this is we built up 5 basic questions, and we thought it would be helpful for everyone to get a great context about this. And so with this first question, Harry, let's talk a little bit more about the mission of the Reshoring Initiative. And, you can explain a little bit about the context of, kind of why we might find ourselves in this situation. And so I'll bring up this example that you suggested here to talk about,
Yeah. So this relates to the trade deficit. So you can see the red line is the trade deficit as the goods trade deficit as a percentage of the U.S. GDP, and you can see it's essentially continued to grow, such that for 2021 we'll probably wind up at $1 trillion, 1 trillion with a T, and that's the 5 million jobs it would take to to produce that amount of goods. And the other line, the blue line, is manufacturing jobs as a percentage of U.S. employment, and you can see the two of them have fallen together, all very tightly correlated. And it's clear that the bulk of the manufacturing job loss is due to the trade deficit. A few apologists will say it's automation, it's automation, it's automation, but it's unambiguous to most observers that the trade deficit is the major cause of the loss of jobs. And then that loss of jobs, manufacturing jobs, good middle class, stable manufacturing jobs with good benefits is a major factor in the hollowing out of the economy and the income inequality that we hear so much about from the politicians. And so the simplest way to recover, to get the polity, to get the populace, happier again, is to bring those jobs back. So we can get both income equality, environment. It's clear that when you shift something from being made in, say, China and shipped here to being made here, the environmental load gets cut by 25 to 50%. The U.S. budget deficit, we've got trillions of dollars of deficits heading out into the future, would be substantially reduced with those 5 million more manufacturing jobs and all those companies making things here, paying taxes here, et cetera, et cetera. Defense is in the condition of every year they put out a report that says what are the products we cannot get in the U.S. or maybe even not get from our allies, we have to get from our adversaries. And the list grows and grows every year. Eventually, if we do not bring back the manufacturing jobs, then eventually the call for protectionism will increase. So some people think reshoring is protectionism. We say no, it's an antidote to protectionism because you won't need protectionism if you have the jobs, if you have the trade balanced. And because eventually, if you don't do that, and the trade deficit and the budget deficit get too big, then the U.S. dollar is going to collapse. And we'll be the low-wage countries the Chinese send the dirty work to get done. And we don't want that to happen. We want to take the high end on this. So there's some really good reasons to reshore.
Yeah, that's a great insight for sure. And so, as we carry on in the conversation today, I think one of the questions that we'll ask kind of at the tail end is, what can organizations do? And I think as well, a question that we'll want to come back to is, if you're a supply chain practitioner in a mid-market privately held or a large publicly traded, what are some of those thought starters that person can, reach out to and start to think about, because it's going to be a heavy lift to bring things, back and localize them for sure. So there's a lot of effort and an energy there that's going to have to happen. So. We'll kind of come to that a bit as well, but that'd be one thing I'd like you to think about is, really a couple of bullet points for someone that's really at an operator level within an organization. What should they do? What kind of talk track should they have with their leadership?
So. We'll cover that.
Awesome.
I think you got another slide for me here.
I do. Yep. Here you go.
Okay. So this is the good news. What I gave you was the bad news. This is now the good news. And so we track reshoring done by a U.S. headquartered company, think General Motors, for example, yeah. And FDI, foreign direct investment, which is done by a foreign headquartered company, Toyota, Siemens, somebody like that. And so in 2010, the year when we started, the sum of those two was about 6,000 manufacturing jobs announced in the year. That you see, it's just overall continuously moved up. Peaked in 2017. The total of the two was about 180,000 jobs announced, driven by the Trump tax and regulatory cuts. Fell off in 2018 and 2019 due to the trade war, business uncertainty. Companies didn't know what was going to happen. Hard to plan those scenarios that you talk about, and therefore companies said, I'm going to wait till all this settles down. We know what the rules are going to be. And then in 2020, reshoring definitely picked up, driven some significantly by COVID, by companies in the healthcare, PPE, et cetera, industries deciding, hey, the people are dying out there because they can't get the products, and hundreds of companies, thousands of companies started up making the products. And then in 2021, continued up to, we haven't finished the numbers yet, but it's going to be 200,000, 220,000 jobs announced. driven by still some of the healthcare, but also other industries seeing the lack of resilience, the lack of self-sufficiency in healthcare, and recognizing that they have the same condition. So other industries have learned from the healthcare experience, and therefore other industries, EV batteries, rare earth minerals, etc., are starting to bring the work back also. So it's been a painful but valuable learning experience for industry. Still not enough, and we want more. But as you can see, we've made very good progress.
Yeah, yeah. And if we look at kind of that long-term trend, take it out, project it out, do you see a growth rate or an estimated growth rate per year, as we're talking like, what's going to happen over the next 10 years or so,
Mm.
how might that compound over the next 10 years?
Well, U.S. manufacturing overall has done very well. If you do a regression line from before the Great Recession, like 10 or 15 years, and you continue that down, and then you compare to what's actually happened in manufacturing, manufacturing is 3 or 4 million higher than one would have predicted 10 or 12 years ago,
Oh,
because we're
okay.
not offshoring as much, and we're reshoring and FDIing a lot more. So some very nice positive trends in terms of manufacturing. But specifically in terms of that and in terms of the limits on reshoring, uh, we have a severe capacity limitation on workforce, especially skilled workforce, tool makers, welders, precision
Yeah.
machinists, people like that. And we do not have enough right now. And if it's projected we'll have a shortage of 2 million in a couple of years. And if we brought back 1 million a year, then we'd have a shortage of 3 or 4 million. That wouldn't be any good. So so so
Right.
the so the conclusion is that unless society changes its priorities and we have fewer kids going on to university to study art and music and history and social science and so on, and more of them deciding to make a higher income and have a better life, uh, getting trained, going to an apprenticeship, becoming those kinds of technicians that I described.
Yeah.
Then if we don't do that, then we won't have the people, and then we can't bring the work back. So it's very dependent on what society does, what the government does. Do they shift some of the uh, college loan money to become apprentice loan money, so that the
Mhm.
apprentice and the employer can find a wage at which the employer is profitable of training the apprentice, and the apprentice has enough money to take care of his family or her family. So
Yeah.
so there's lots of things that have to be done.
Right, right. Yeah. And that investment on, trades-based education, there's a pretty high ROI on that for folks to, go to, community college and welding or machining or something like that. Really, really great ROI on that compared to the traditional university path for a lot of folks, for sure.
Actually, I did a
Excellent.
study some years ago, and I compared the lifetime after-tax income of a toolmaker apprentice versus an English major, and concluded that the toolmaker would have $1 million more net worth at the age of 49 than the English major.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the guidance counselors never hear that. All they say is, "Here's the best college you can get into. Go to the college, and don't even think about those other alternatives."
Right, right. And I think that's a evidence of kind of like this flip of mindset that we all collectively have to have as we carry forward, in building operations and working them out. So that's great. That's great insight. So let's jump to the next question here. So, we talked about, why is it important to bring back the jobs, and really, again, why do we have such a large trade deficit?
Primarily, root cause: the U.S. is not price competitive. Companies moved factories and sourced in first Mexico, and then I don't know, Japan and Taiwan, Korea, eventually China, India, what have you. They weren't there seeking quality. Were not seeking availability. They were seeking the lowest price that they could find an acceptable product at. And so this chart shows people who have used our total cost of ownership, so TCO estimator, which is online on our website, and they've gone in and compared a Chinese product, a Chinese sourced product, to a US sourced product. And the horizontal axis is the Chinese price as a percentage of the US price. So at 100, they're equal. And you can see the mode or the high point of the distribution is somewhere around 70. So
Mhm.
on average, if you just want to simplify it, on average, the US price is 40% higher. So 1.4 times 70 being 98 or about 100. So so companies look at that, and I can't blame them. They look at that, and if that's all they look at, they're going to say, my competitor's doing it. He's going to cut the price. I've got to do it, or I'm going to be out of business. So,
Right.
so throughout the developing world, this is a pretty solid representation of the actual cost difference, which is driven primarily by the wage difference, but also occasionally by subsidies, occasionally by other things like that, but primarily by wage difference. And in Europe, say, we're still 10 to 15% higher than Germany and places like that. And so why is all this? The dollar, being the reserve currency, is consistently overpriced by 20 or 30%. Okay? And so we start with a cost that's too high in that sense, and then we do not have the skilled workforce that say the Germans have.
Mhm.
Germany and Switzerland, about 60% of the high school kids go into some kind of an apprenticeship. Here, maybe 4 or 5% do, mainly into construction, almost none into manufacturing. So they wind up with a lower labor cost than a free market would normally result in, and with on average people higher up the skill level, better trained, and then having their factories busier because they're more competitive and therefore buying more modern equipment. And so we have less skilled people with less modern equipment at a higher cost trying to compete. It doesn't work. Okay,
Right. Right.
so that's the major issue. Our costs are too high, and until we figure out how to get our costs competitive, you're not going to bring back as many jobs as I want. But the methodology to do that is clear. The dollar's too high, get it down by 20 or 30%. Better basic education, much better recruiting and training of skilled workforce. Keep the corporate tax rate from going up. The government now wants to raise it. That's crazy. Take it down. Too much regulation. We do not have a VAT, a value-added tax. Other countries, we ship to them, they hit it with a 15% value-added tax. They ship to us, their government gives them a 15% tax credit, and then we do not hit them with a value-added tax. We're stupid. It's like going to a prize fight with your hands tied behind your back.
Right.
Um,
Right.
a series of things like that. Our government has not had an industrial policy. It's starting to think about an industrial policy, so we're edging in the right direction to do what almost all competitor countries have been doing for 40 or 50 years.
Right, right, and yeah, some of the themes around that sometimes are tools, right? How are we educating? That's one theme. The technology aspects, you mentioned automation and some other things, and then the trade aspects, right? So there's kind of these three T's or sometimes four T's that are really really impactful in these decisions for sure, for sure. So this is some great insight to understand, and I hope the folks that are listening and watching get a context of some of the factors that are happening, kind of at a global level and a macro level. And so there's another one out there that we want to kind of talk about a little bit, Harry, and to kind of set this up. How is the COVID-19 public health pandemic accelerated the desire to localize? And so if we wind back, I guarantee, May of 2020, we did a session like this for folks to kind of get a sense of, all right, the pandemic was just in its very very early stages, and at that time we presented four scenarios of potential possibility, and so because there were things that we didn't know, right, we were kind of all thinking maybe it's going to be a kind of a V recovery. I mean, there were massive layoffs, and people just lost their job one day, and so we were thinking, well, maybe one or two might be a bit of a slowdown, but we've seen something that's lasted 24 months plus in some contexts, and when we talk about the scenarios around this, we're going to explain a bit of a method that will be helpful, but we encourage folks 2 years ago to say, look, you got to look at some of these worst case scenarios. And so the question that I'd kind of come back to you about is, what have you seen in your work, in regards to the pandemic and the impact it's had, and has that accelerated people's thinking about localization and potentially reshoring, because of where their business was previously, or where their supply chain was previously. So what have you seen in regards to the pandemic influence?
Well, clearly, the COVID, the pandemic, drove PPE, medical, pharmaceutical, ventilators, all these things that people needed that we found we didn't have. And you saw doctors on television, crying because they were, their staff was at risk.
Sure.
And so clearly in that, very, very heavily, but sad, in a sense, sadly, because hundreds of people started up mask factories, and when things were tightest and we couldn't get them, and the business looked good, and then things slowed down, and the Chinese are dumping the masks at 2 cents a piece, and the U.S. companies can't compete, and they're going, and all these entrepreneurs who stepped up to protect our country are now going out of business. And the government isn't smart enough to decide to buy and commit to continue to buy from American manufacturers, so that when you hit the next peak and you don't have enough, we'll have it here instead of having to be dependent on China or somebody else to provide it. Clearly in the medical area, absolute significant change, driven by companies, driven by the government, driven by, to some extent, by consumers. And
Sure.
then, as I said before, the learning experience from that has bridged over into other industries who have said, I can't let that happen to us, we're at risk, and therefore we should do something about it. So we have a list of what we call supply chain gaps, product categories where there's a lot being imported and nothing or almost nothing made here. And those are great opportunities for companies, domestic or foreign companies, to go in and invest and become the only significant U.S. supplier in that category, and take the business back from the imports.
Excellent. And so that's probably a reference that I'll want to post call, kind of make sure we have the link to, and share that with some of the folks, because I think that represents a really, really great opportunity. And we've had conversations with clients about, within their complex supply chain, they maybe have a dozen raws or raw materials that are, sourced in a foreign region, and the extended supply lines and things like that have been really, really impactful on their business. Sometimes multiple $1 million per month of impact to their business because of extended supply lines and things like that. I think another place where this manifests itself, and we've probably all seen this, if chipsets is one in particular that if you go to your local auto dealership, you're not seeing a lot of cars there as well. And so I think that that's another focus area for sure. Is it specific industries that are seeing it, or is it pretty much across the board? Is it textiles or chipsets, or is it sheet metal, plastics, all seeing these kind of impacts from longer supply lines?
We've been working on a stainless steel shortage
Hmm.
due to various causes, including lack of imports, companies shutting down that production, et cetera. But a lot of smaller companies that need stainless to make product of some kind cannot get it, and almost at risk of hundreds of companies going out of business because of that shortage. So there's very specific shortages like that, and obviously there's shortages fairly across the board, and some of it's weather in the U.S., the blizzards and this kind of thing, and other is clearly COVID driven, because now China's always been very tough on COVID. You get one person sick, they close they close the city, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
nobody talks to anybody. Yeah? And they've been having with Omicron, they're having spots of it, and they're shutting down cities. And when they shut the city down, nothing gets produced and nothing gets shipped. And despite them nothing can ship, we've still got the 100 ships, off the port in L.A. But those cessations, still driven by COVID, are part of that supply chain problem that you've seen. And at the same time, one of the results of COVID was the government handing out trillions of dollars to consumers who used it primarily to buy televisions and refrigerators and things from offshore, which is what's sitting in those boats trying to get into the country. So in that sense, that COVID has driven up demand and then blocked supply.
Right, right, right. And so it's a good kind of segue into, the next question and probably top of mind of, organization leaders and supply chain leaders and supply chain practitioners. And so, this question of, well, what should we do as an organization? And I think we wanted to present to those listening and watching kind of three steps, and we can break out the context around this a little bit. But, step one, obviously we talked about scenario planning. I think, no one anticipated a multi-year pandemic and the impacts and the shortages that would create. So it's really important to look at those scenarios. And I think I'm hopeful that one lesson from supply chain practitioners is I really need to look at that, what we might call doomsday scenario. So that's one step. The second step, which you're going to share some insights on and data on, is the trends, both the historical, the mega trends, the macro trends, and then the third one is really understanding total cost of ownership. And so these are kind of the three areas that we think are helpful for folks, whether you're a practitioner, how you can educate your leadership team, or you're a leader trying to figure this thing out. And it took us a long time to get to this place. It took, decisions that were made 15, 20, 30 years ago sometimes. And we're kind of paying the piper for that now. So let's kind of talk about those in particular. So this first one, let's kind of get the context around, this comparative of price chart that you've shared with us.
Okay, so total cost of ownership is a online software it's on our website, and you put in the user picks two locations, U.S. and some other place, China, India, Germany, whatever you,
Yeah.
and puts in the FOB or ex works price at the two locations, and then answers a series of questions that add in the duty and the freight and the carrying cost of inventory, tariffs, everything that you can imagine, and the end result is you've got the blue line, which is essentially that same chart I showed you 15 minutes ago, the China price as a percentage of the U.S. price. And then the red line is that for the exact same products, the China TCO as a percentage of the U.S. TCO. And then the yellow line is TCO, but with a 15% Trump tariff, which is true to, actually 25% is more common on product coming in from China. And what's critical here is in the lower right corner, that with price for these 190 cases, with price the US won 8% of the time, with TCO 32%, and if there was a Trump tariff, 46% of the time. So just by doing the math correctly, companies should, on average, identify 20-30% of the work that they're now importing that can be made with equal or greater profitability, as long as they recognize all the costs. But if they continue to look only at the FOB price, then you're back to that relatively small percentage. So this is on our website, and we encourage everybody to go there and use it. I'm in the process of revising it to include things like ESG, environmental, social, and governance, to include the risk of China decoupling, China deciding it's so mad at us because of Taiwan and Hong Kong and everything that they're going to stop shipping anything to the United States. Small possibility, but a possibility. And we're including other new factors like that we think are especially relevant today.
Excellent. And I think one of the advantages of this, localizing decisions is really when we think about lean, and delivery to the end customer, the more local you are, right? It's just much more leaner. And you mentioned, the ESG impacts and things like that. So it's even speed to delivery to the end customer is a benefit here that I think gets washed out a lot of times when it's just a pure kind of FOB price comparison, for sure.
So what you mentioned lean. One thing I like on lean, a lot of people say companies got too lean by doing just in time.
Mm-hmm.
And I say no. The problem wasn't that they got too lean. They did not get lean enough because just in time with supply coming in from halfway around the world, that's not lean. Lean is to only bring value to the customer, not pay for all that shipping and inventory, have your sourcing local. And so if you were truly a lean organization, you would have had local supply, and then your just in time would have worked much, much better than it
Right.
has under the current situation. So I'd say companies are not lean enough.
Right. And I think as we kind of framed up the session today, that was one of those things about resetting that mindset. Because, the conversations 10, 15 years ago well, we're going to be a leaner organization because of just in time. And it was always hard to rationalize, well, wait a minute, we had suppliers that were 3 hours away, now they're, um, you know, 5,000 miles away, and it's going to take us 6 weeks to get that material. So it was always very hard to rationalize that. But I think that's right. That's the flip in the lean mindset and the lean thinking that's really important. Excellent. So a couple other things just really quickly for folks to consider. Scenario planning. So how do you do scenario planning in your supply chain? And so really kind of two things that we would suggest is, create a quadrant grid like this. Think about your axis of uncertainty in your supply chain and look out, even take a look out 36 plus months. And as the spirit of this call, what was it going to look like in 10 years from now? So you can plot these scenarios and kind of look at what's going to happen with revenue or supply chain or your WIP inventory. And these are all things that are really, really helpful. So this is one thing that we can do. Another thing is as understanding the trends in supply chain. So this one in particular we're focusing on of localized manufacturing, why that is so critical and so helpful, for your local economy for sure. Shorter lead times, higher product consistency, and improved responsiveness. And we've touched on these other things, new opportunities to innovate and deliver value. You mentioned, Harry, the list of materials that have some challenges, which are primarily from overseas, and there's opportunities there for folks to consider sourcing and bringing back here. So there's some great opportunities there to create additional value and growth in future startups. So these are some of those trends, and as mentioned, you talked about the TCO model, which is a great reference and resource. And I highly encourage everybody that's listening or watching to take a look at this. And again, this is as from a data set perspective, Harry. I know that you've had several, a couple hundred cases, I guess, that have walked through this, and this is where you're sharing this data from. So this is real world stuff that you're sharing with everybody as part of your mission, correct?
Correct. Yeah, actually, we're up to 500 or something like that that
Nice.
have done calculations. So it's not as big as Microsoft, but we're we're doing okay.
It is, however, statistically significant. So, which I think is really important for folks to consider. So as we wrap today, we're just a few minutes past, but as we wrap, if there was some advice that you could give to supply chain practitioners, how can they have this conversation with their leadership, which may not be thinking about this, that the scenario is, well, we don't need to do that, or maybe their pressure that they had in their supply chain due to COVID and the pandemic has eased, so they're not going to think about it anymore because now the supply is coming in.
Uh,
How would you suggest a supply chain practitioner approach their leadership about why this is so important?
I would say that what's happened here will eventually happen again, and that in addition, the tension between the U.S. and China will be ongoing. China's not going to back down. The U.S. isn't going to back down, and so that tension will continue. So the risk of I hope not conflict, but of significant disruption in demand will be there, and so and that could be existential for companies, and therefore they should at least uh, do the math and bring back what they'll be more profitable bringing back now, and take as much of that risk away as they possibly can. Move some to other countries, et cetera, out of China, but there's a lot that they can bring here and be more profitable, and at the same time that they're convincing their internal management to source wisely, they can use the same tool, the same TCO estimator we help supply chain companies use to convince their customers to look at the total cost instead of just the FOB price and see that it's in the customer's interest to bring some of the work back. So you can work both from the supply chain side and from the sales side.
Excellent. Excellent. That's a great cap for this conversation. And, I want to share a couple of things to folks about how you can learn more. We do digital workshops with our education partner, Baldwin Wallace University. We have a few of these coming up in the coming weeks. Very explicitly to this topic, 20 and 21 April, we're doing a 2-day workshop on business continuity and supply chain resiliency. So these methods about scenario planning, understanding TCO, and the strategy in regards to localizing your supply chain. That's a great workshop to attend in particular on this topic. So with that, Harry, again, my sincere gratitude for making time and, helping to put this together, and, really grateful for you sharing your insights. And let us know, what do you have coming up, and what's going on in the coming weeks and months for you.
I think I told you we had just great contacts last week from all kinds of media and the National Economic Council of the White House asking for help on reshoring. So we're busy, and working on getting those 5 million jobs back. And for the listeners out there, if you've got 2 jobs I can help you bring back, get in touch with me and let me help you do it.
Awesome. And best way to get in touch with you? I know we had that contact info here in the deck, but what's the best way to get reached and get in touch with you?
Your website is reshorenow.org, and I'm harry.moser@reshorenow.org. So just email and tell me what your opportunities are, or work that you're afraid you're going to lose to offshore, and we're here to help you.
Awesome. And again, Harry, sincere gratitude. I appreciate it, and look forward to learning more, and hopefully we can deliver to you guys some more examples of some reshoring opportunities for you too.
Very good. Let's do it together. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Harry.
Bye bye,
Cheers. And
everybody. Yep.
thanks, everyone. Have a great day.